go back to the village with your head held high. It's 3 S's.
For more than a decade, Susan Boyle has been one of the most misunderstood figures to ever walk onto a talent show stage. When she first appeared on America's Got Talent, the world didn't know what to expect. Viewers judged her before she sang a single note, her appearance, her quiet confidence, her humble background. And then, in just a few seconds, everything changed. Her voice silenced the laughter, stunned the judges, and turned disbelief into awe. Overnight, Susan Boyle became a global sensation, but fame didn't bring the fairy tale ending many people assumed. Behind the viral clips, sold-out albums, and standing ovations, Susan was carrying emotional weight that few truly understood. For years, fans whispered theories about her private life, her struggles, and why she slowly stepped back from the spotlight. Some believed she was fragile. Others thought she had chosen isolation. And many wondered if the pressure of sudden worldwide fame had cost her more than it gave. Wondered if the pressure of sudden worldwide fame, the pressure of sudden worldwide fame had cost her more than it gave. It's her more than it gave. Now, after years of speculation, Susan Boyle has finally spoken in her own words. What she confirmed wasn't shocking in a scandalous way, but it was deeply emotional. It explained her silences, her absences, and the pain hidden behind her gentle smile. This isn't a story about controversy. It's a story about truth, resilience, and what really happens when an ordinary person is thrust into extraordinary. Fame before the world is ready to show kindness. If you thought you knew Susan Boyle's journey, think again, because the reality is far more human and far more heartbreaking than anyone imagined. Susan Boyle's story did not begin on a glittering stage or under bright television lights. Long before the world knew her name, she lived a quiet and often lonely life in Blackburn, a small town in Scotland. Born in 1961, Susan was the youngest of 9 children in a working-class family. From an early age, she knew what it felt like to be overlooked, misunderstood, and underestimated. School was especially difficult. She struggled to fit in, and for years she was wrongly labeled as having learning difficulties, a misunderstanding that deeply affected her confidence and self-worth. Music became her refuge. While the outside world often treated her harshly, singing gave Susan a sense of safety and purpose. She sang in church choirs, practiced alone at home, and dreamed of a future that felt impossibly far away. Yet, even as she grew older, those dreams remained just that, dreams. After her mother's death in 2007, Susan found herself more isolated than ever. Losing the one person who truly believed in her talent left a wound that never fully healed. Still, it was also the moment that pushed her toward a decision that would change her life forever. In 2009. At the age of 47, Susan auditioned for Britain's Got Talent, a move that required enormous courage. She walked onto the stage visibly nervous, dressed modestly, and carrying years of quiet hope. The reaction from the audience was immediate and cruel. Snickers, raised eyebrows, and doubtful expressions filled the room. Even the judges appeared unconvinced. It was a moment that perfectly captured how often the world judges without listening. Then Susan sang. The first notes of I Dreamed a Dream transformed the atmosphere instantly. Laughter vanished. Skepticism turned into shock. Within seconds, the entire room was silent, hanging on every note of her voice. By the end of the performance, the audience was on its feet. The judges were emotional, and Susan Boyle had become a global phenomenon. The clip went viral within hours, spreading across continents and breaking records. Overnight, Susan became a symbol of hidden talent and second chances. But what many people didn't realize was how overwhelming that instant fame truly was. Susan went from a quiet life to relentless media attention almost overnight. Interviews, public appearances, and constant scrutiny became her new reality. While the world celebrated her as an inspiration, Susan struggled to adjust to the pressure. She later admitted that the sudden loss of privacy and control was deeply distressing. The same people who once doubted her now demanded constant access to her life. Despite finishing second on the show, Susan's career skyrocketed. Her debut album shattered sales records, making her one of the fastest-selling artists in history. Awards, accolades, and global tours followed. On the surface, it looked like a dream come true. But internally, Susan was fighting battles that fame could not fix. Years of emotional isolation combined with intense public pressure began to take their toll. What fans often overlooked was how unprepared Susan was for the machinery of celebrity culture. She wasn't chasing fame, she was chasing a voice, a chance to be heard. And when the world finally listened, it didn't always listen gently. The expectations were relentless, and the margin for vulnerability was almost non-existent. This early of Susan Boyle's rise explains something crucial. Her later silences were not disappearances, and her pauses were not failures. They were the natural response of a deeply sensitive person navigating a world that moved far faster than her heart ever could. And as her story continues, it becomes clear that the biggest struggle of her life wasn't being unnoticed, it was surviving. Being seen by everyone at once that after the explosion of success that followed Britain's Got Talent, Susan Boyle found herself living a life that felt unreal. Album sales soared into the millions, world tours were booked back-to-back, and her face appeared on magazines across the globe. Yet behind the applause and record-breaking numbers, Susan was quietly unraveling. The pace of fame moved far faster than she could emotionally process, and the expectations placed on her grew heavier with each passing month. Susan later revealed that she felt treated more like a product than a person during this period. Schedules were packed tightly, leaving little room for rest or reflection. Interviews often focused less on her music and more on her appearance, personal life, or perceived quirks. While many fans meant well, the constant public commentary reminded her that she was no longer in control of her own narrative. Every move was watched, analyzed, and judged. In 2009, the strain reached a breaking point. Following the Britain's Got Talent finale, Susan was admitted to a private clinic after showing signs of severe emotional exhaustion. Headlines exploded once again, but this time the tone was different. Instead of celebrating her talent, the media speculated about her mental health, often with little compassion. For Susan, this was one of the darkest moments of her life. The world that had lifted her up so quickly now seemed just as eager to pull her apart. During this time, Susan received a diagnosis that explained much of her lifelong struggles. She was on the autism spectrum. For her, the revelation was both painful and freeing. Painful, because it confirmed that she had gone decades without understanding why certain things felt so overwhelming. Freeing, because it finally gave her language for experiences she had never been able to explain. She described the diagnosis as a relief, a missing piece of her identity finally falling into place. Rather than stepping away completely, Susan made a deliberate choice to continue, but on her own terms. She reduced public appearances, became more selective about interviews, and focused on the part of fame that had always mattered to her: music. Recording studios felt safer than red carpets. Singing remained the one space where she felt fully herself, without masks or expectations. Her later albums, while not always matching the explosive numbers of her debut, still performed remarkably well. More importantly, they reflected growth and control. Susan was no longer trying to prove anything. She wasn't chasing validation or headlines. She was reclaiming her voice in a quieter, steadier way. Fans who followed closely noticed a shift, not just in sound but in spirit. However, public misconceptions persisted. Periods of silence led to rumors that she had disappeared or been forgotten. In reality, Susan was doing something far more difficult than performing. She was learning how to live with balance. She spent more time in Scotland, surrounded by familiar places and routines that grounded her. Fame became something she visited, not something she lived inside of every day. This phase of Susan's life revealed a truth that many overlook about overnight success. Recognition does not erase past wounds. Applause does not automatically heal loneliness. For Susan Boyle, the real work began after the spotlight dimmed, when she had to reconcile global fame with a deeply private, sensitive inner world. What she ultimately confirmed through her actions was simple but powerful. Stepping back is not the same as giving up. Sometimes it is an act of survival. And for Susan, survival meant choosing peace over pressure, authenticity over expectation, and self-understanding over endless approval. As the years passed, Susan Boyle's relationship with fame continued to evolve in quiet but meaningful ways. She was no longer the constant headline fixture she once was, yet her presence never truly faded. Instead, Susan settled into a rhythm that prioritized stability over spectacle. To many fans, this shift felt like confirmation of something they had long suspected, that Susan never wanted the chaos of celebrity life, only the chance to sing and be heard on her own terms. Living back in Scotland, Susan chose familiarity over luxury. Despite her wealth, she remained in the same modest childhood home for years, a decision that baffled outsiders but made perfect sense to her. The house represented safety, memories, and continuity, things fame could not replace. This choice alone said more about her character than any interview ever could. Success had not changed her values. It had simply given her options. During this period, Susan became more open about her emotional world. She spoke candidly about loneliness, admitting that forming close relationships had always been difficult for her. While fans often speculated about romance, Susan clarified that her life was not defined by what it lacked, but by what brought her peace. Music, routine, and personal space mattered more to her than public expectations of what happiness should look like. Professionally, she continued to record and release music, though with far less fanfare. Each project felt intentional rather than rushed. Gone were the frantic schedules and non-stop promotions. In their place was a slower, more deliberate creative process. Susan's voice, once framed as a shocking surprise, matured into something deeper and more controlled. Critics noted that her later performances carried a quiet confidence that had been absent in her earliest days of fame. Yet even in this calmer phase, public curiosity never disappeared. Any rare appearance sparked renewed discussion, with fans asking the same question again and again. Was Susan okay? The irony was striking. For years, the world had demanded more from her, and when she finally chose less, that absence became a source of concern. What many failed to see was that this quieter life was not a sign of decline, but of healing. Susan also began to speak about self-acceptance in a way that resonated deeply with her audience. She acknowledged that her journey had been shaped by misunderstanding, both from others and from herself. Learning about her place on the autism spectrum helped her reinterpret her past with compassion rather than shame. Moments that once felt like failures now made sense as unmet needs. This self-awareness changed how she engaged with the world. She no longer felt obligated to meet every expectation placed upon her. Declining opportunities was no longer frightening. It was empowering. For someone who had spent much of her life being told she was less than, choosing her own limits became an act of reclaiming dignity, perhaps the most powerful confirmation Susan offered during this time was not spoken aloud but lived. She showed that success does not have to be loud to be meaningful. A life can be rich without being constantly visible. By stepping out of the relentless spotlight, Susan challenged the idea that relevance requires constant presence. In doing so, she redefined what victory looked like. It wasn't chart positions or awards, though she had those in abundance. It was waking up without anxiety, singing because she wanted to, and living without the need to explain herself to the world. For fans who truly listened, this phase of her life confirmed something profound. Susan Boyle's greatest achievement wasn't her sudden rise to fame. It was her quiet decision to protect herself once the world was watching. In recent years, Susan Boyle's rare public appearances have carried a different kind of weight. They are no longer moments of shock or spectacle, but gentle reminders of a woman who survived an extraordinary journey and chose herself in the end. When fans catch a glimpse of her now, whether through a brief interview, a quiet performance, or a simple update, the same realization settles in. Susan was never lost. She simply stepped away from the noise. What Susan has finally confirmed through her actions is something deeply human. Fame, no matter how positive it appears, can be overwhelming when it arrives without warning or protection. For someone as emotionally sensitive as Susan, the early years of global attention were not just challenging, they were destabilizing. By retreating, she wasn't rejecting her supporters or her gift. She was preserving the part of herself that made that gift possible in the first place. Financial success gave Susan security, but it did not redefine her priorities. She avoided the excesses often associated with celebrity life and remained grounded in routines that brought her comfort. This choice puzzled many, yet it explained everything. Susan valued peace over praise, familiarity over luxury, and authenticity over constant approval. In an industry built on visibility, her restraint became her quiet rebellion. Fans often interpret silence as sadness, but Susan's story suggests the opposite. Her reduced presence was not a sign of heartbreak, it was evidence of boundaries. After years of being spoken about, analyzed, and projected onto, she reclaimed the right to live without explanation. That decision alone reshaped how many people understood her journey. She wasn't fragile in the way the public assumed. She was discerning. Another truth became clear over time: Susan's impact had already been sealed. She didn't need to remain everywhere to remain important. Her audition had changed how millions viewed talent, age, and appearance. It opened doors not just for herself, but for countless others who felt unseen. That legacy did not disappear when she chose a quieter life, it solidified. In later reflections, Susan expressed gratitude rather than regret. She acknowledged the hardships, but she also recognized how music gave her purpose when little else did. Singing was never about applause for her. It was about expression, release, and connection. When those elements were threatened by pressure, stepping back became necessary. That choice required strength, not weakness. What ultimately resonates most about Susan's later years is her calm certainty. There's no urgency in her voice now, no need to convince anyone of her worth. The world once gasped in disbelief when she sang. Today, she no longer needs that reaction. She knows who she is. And that self-knowledge is something fame could never give her. For fans who have followed her from the beginning, this offers clarity. The question was never whether Susan Boyle could survive fame. It was whether fame could ever give her what she truly needed. The answer, quietly and unmistakably, is no. What she needed was understanding, stability, and control over her own story. In the end, Susan Boyle didn't confirm rumors with words. She confirmed something far more meaningful with her life choices. She showed that stepping away can be an act of courage, that fulfillment doesn't require constant visibility, and that sometimes the most powerful statement is choosing peace when the world expects noise. Her voice still matters. Her story still inspires. But now it does so without demanding anything from her in return. And that may be the most beautiful ending of all.